On April 8, 1981, investigators discovered Gordon and Karen Alexander's lifeless bodies with stab wounds in their house. Gordon was found deceased in the kitchen, according to authorities, but his sister Karen was discovered breathing on her bed next to the living room. Karen Alexander was 14 years old, and her brother was 13, in accordance with that Times News report. Karen was brought to the hospital, where she passed away of her injuries soon after, according to authorities. Investigators found out that the young girl had been assaulted. There weren't any signs of a forcible entry. Moreover, at the time of the killings, their mother was admitted for mental illness at Wadley Hospital, and their father had departed for work around 12 p.m. the previous evening. The autopsy report showed that Karen was sexually assaulted for 2 to 3 days before her passing. Not only that, there were indications of assault for over a 6-month period before as well. Preceding the incident, Weldon was working the evening shift at Copper Tire and Rubber. Weldon returned home from work just after 7 a.m. and reported that both the screen door and the wooden front door were partially ajar. He claimed that upon entering, he discovered his son deceased in the kitchen, while his daughter, he believed, might still be alive, lying in bed close to the living room area. Weldon informed police that he pulled the kitchen knife from Karen's body and placed it on an adjacent bookshelf before officers got there. Investigators spoke with people they thought would be of interest and obtained some information, but not enough to make an arrest. In 1983, Henry Lee Lucas, a serial criminal, admitted to slaying the Alexander siblings. However, due to a lack of evidence, the case was abandoned. In 2022, the Alexander siblings case was revisited with Captain Calvin Seward leading the investigation. Back then, when the killings occurred, Seward was a patrol officer tasked with interviewing potential suspects. Seward explained that his devotion to investigating the killings remained because his daughter attended the same school as Karen. Over the course of 18 months, Seward came across and interrogated individuals connected to the initial investigation. Tissue under the siblings' fingernails were taken and tested for DNA, as reported by Dr. Todd Steffi, a forensic criminologist who assisted Texarkana law enforcement with the case. The test showed the sperm found on Karen's bedsheet to be that of Weldon Alexander's, their father. Furthermore, the dried blood found on Gordon's hands and Karen's body had fibers, brass, copper, and zinc, all of which were utilized in the production of tires at Copper Tire and Rubber, where their father worked. During a press conference on October 19th, Texarkana Police Chief Michael Cram made an announcement that Weldon Alexander is suspected to have stabbed his 13-year-old son Gordon and 14-year-old daughter Karen to death in 1981. Sadly, the suspect passed away in 2014, evading justice forever. Seward added that he was taken aback by the investigation's outcome, as detectives had previously believed the time of death to be sometime in the morning. They eventually learned that it wasn't the case, and that the brother's body was cold once the investigators arrived. That led them to believe that he had been deceased for hours. Seward thinks the father attacked his daughter to assault her, and that the brother then fought to protect his sister. This ended up with the father stabbing both the daughter and son. Connie Mitchell, the prosecuting attorney for Miller County, commented that she is certain of Weldon being the only suspect of killings, and that if he were still alive, she would be seeking out an arrest warrant on 2 counts of capital murder. The untimely passing of 2 local adolescent girls from 1983 and 1986, who were assaulted and slain under similar circumstances, shook the communities of Narborough and Enderby. While returning from her babysitter shift on November 21, 1983, 15-year-old Lynda Mann took a shortcut. Nevertheless, she failed to return home, prompting her family and neighbors to spend the night looking for her. The following morning, her body was discovered assaulted and strangled on a desolate walkway referred to as the Black Pad by locals. There weren't sufficient leads or evidence to link anyone to the crime. Therefore, the case became cold. 3 years later, on July 31st, 1986, another teenage girl, 15-year-old Dawn Ashworth, left her house to go meet with an acquaintance at her place. Within the next 48 hours, her body was discovered in a forested area near a walkway known as 10-Pound Lane. She was also battered, assaulted, and passed away from strangulation. Police suspected that both the slayings were carried out by the same perpetrator, and their suspicion was validated when forensic evidence confirmed the same blood type. In 1985, Alec Jeffries, working with Peter Gill and David Werrett, introduced a new technique called DNA profiling. One of the main elements of this technique would later be useful in cases of SA. It implied that the investigators succeeded in matching the sperm sample collected from a man's body to a person with type A blood and an enzyme profile found in only 10% of the male population. The most significant achievement, according to Gill then, was coming up with a suitable method of extraction and separating sperm from vaginal cells. Without this, it surely would have been tough to utilize DNA in cases of assault. Using this technology, Jeffries contrasted the semen samples from the two victims to a sample of blood obtained from the primary suspect, Richard Buckland, indisputably proving that both of them were murdered by the same man, who was in fact not Buckland. He ended up being the first person to have his innocence proven via DNA fingerprinting. Subsequently, the investigators followed up with the DNA of 5,500 local men, yet found no positive match. On August 1st, 1987, Ian Kelly, a baker from Newbold Verdon, Leicestershire, and Colin Pitchfork's co-worker, admitted in a Leicester bar that Kelly had faked Pitchfork's blood test by taking it. Pitchfork said to him that he cannot provide the sample under his own name since he had previously done so, while posing as a friend of his who had been found guilty of breaking and entering. The conversation was overheard by a woman who informed the authorities of it. Pitchfork was taken into custody on September 19, 1987, as it came to light that his DNA was a positive match for the sample collected from the girls' bodies. He entered a guilty plea to 2 counts of assault, 2 slayings, as well as an additional count of assault for a different incident. He was given a life sentence. The Secretary of State proposed a minimum sentence of 30 years for him, but it was later shortened to 28 years after an appeal in 2009. He was scheduled to be freed from jail in July 2021, after the parole board denied the government's request to keep him behind bars. The government requested an assessment of Pitchfork's behavior in June 2021, right after the parole board decided that he was ready to be released. But the parole board overruled the government's objection to its decision, and Pitchfork, then aged 61, was released in September. Lord Chancellor Robert Buckland questioned the government's decision to release Pitchfork, asserting that the parole board committee did not provide adequate justifications on agreeing with the evidence offered by experts. Nevertheless, Judge Michael Topolsky Queen's Counsel, who reconsidered the parole board's decision, disagreed, ruling that the decision wasn't unreasonable and denied the appeal to reconsider. He went on to say that this was and is still a serious, complicated, and notorious case. The families of the 2 innocent girls who were brutally assaulted and killed will always be plagued by the horrible fallout from these events. Pitchfork is now placed under 36 strict monitoring conditions, in addition to the conventional restrictions imposed on anyone serving a portion of their term in the community. When Pitchfork would be discharged from jail, he will still have to follow strict license regulations. In the summer of 1978, Wagaman, Louisiana, was a close-knit community where children freely roamed the streets during their summer vacations. Stephanie Lynn Hebert, a 6-year-old girl full of life, was one of those children. However, tragedy struck when Stephanie went missing, sparking a frantic search by her family and the community. Initially thought to be a kidnapping, her body was discovered months later, showing signs of assault and the ravages of nature, confirming the worst fears of her loved ones. Who could have committed such a heinous deed towards an innocent child? On June 30th, 1972, Donald and Joyce Hebert gave birth to a lovely girl and named her Stephanie Lynn Hebert. The middle-class family lived in Wagaman, Louisiana. Stephanie finished preschool at Live Oak Manor Elementary School in May 1978, after which the students were released for summer holiday. Children were permitted to go outside on their own as long as they returned before sunset, given that it was still an era of innocence, and that no one expected anything to happen to them within their safe and close-knit neighborhood. On June 13, 1978, a few days before her 6th birthday, Stephanie returned home for a quick bite. She had spent the previous evening at her friend Lisey's place. After finishing her studies around 2:30 p.m., she left to see another friend, Lori, who resided just a few blocks away. Again, it was a small neighborhood, so she went by herself. This was the last time she was seen alive. She never showed up at her friend's doorstep. When her parents heard of it, they immediately called the police and gave them a description of their daughter, Stephanie. They launched a lookout for a little girl with blonde hair, blue eyes, and wearing baby blue-rimmed glasses. More or less, 100 deputies and 50 volunteers took part in the search for Stephanie, going through the swamps and wooded areas surrounding the development on foot. There were helicopters flying over those forests as well, surveying the whole region. Heavy machinery was also sought to help searchers get access to areas covered by trees and underbrush. But when Stephanie could not be found after 3 days of constant searching, it was concluded that she had been kidnapped. Initially, it was assumed that Stephanie had just wandered off and become lost on her own. But a while later, the search yielded a lead. A neighborhood ice cream truck vendor claimed that around 4:30 to 5 p.m. on the day Stephanie went missing, a girl matching her description along with a woman wearing a lot of makeup bought 2 bars of cotton candy from him. Around 5:30 p.m., an 8-year-old kid from the neighborhood also spotted Stephanie allegedly with the same woman around 4 blocks from the Hebert's house. But even after a thorough search, no such woman could be found, and the lead went cold. As the days stretched into months, the chances of her still being alive were very slim. Unfortunately, 5 months later, the week before Thanksgiving, a hunter came across an unsettling discovery. A small skeleton was found tied to a willow tree with a rope in a remote rural area of St. Charles Parish, around 20 miles from her house. Everything, including her clothes, shoes, and glasses, was scattered all over the place, except for her underwear. The body was identified to be that of Stephanie's. Investigators deduced that she was still breathing when she was abandoned there to be a prey to wild animals and consumed by nature. Despite the fact that the precise cause of death was indeterminate, detectives were baffled as to what kind of monster was capable of carrying out such horrible acts. They looked into the case in great detail, yet found nothing. In the end, the case became cold. The case remained shelved for decades until early 2010s, when new evidence surfaced. In 2012, a brave victim, who remains anonymous, came forward with some extremely disturbing information about her own sexual assault in 1979. This revelation led to Daniel Parks being named as the main suspect in Stephanie's case by the authorities. At the time of the incident, Daniel Parks lived 8 houses away from the Hebert's residence. During the same time period as Stephanie's kidnapping, he allegedly assaulted another 7-year-old girl from the neighborhood. That same girl disclosed this information in 2012. The girl was familiar with Stephanie and remembered Parks threatening her to not say a word, or else she would end up like Stephanie. Parks confessed to the sexual assault and the statement about Stephanie during the police's questioning, but later changed his story. He said that due to his diabetes, he had wrongfully implicated himself for the crime. He was sentenced to life in prison after being convicted of 2 counts of aggravated sexual assault, but was never charged for Stephanie's demise, owing to the lack of evidence. For several years, he remained as the primary suspect in Stephanie's murder, albeit he was never tried. At last, within the same year, 50-year-old Jason Franklin, Jr., nicknamed Jay, came forward and revealed the sexual and physical abuse he suffered at the hands of his own father. Investigators shifted their focus to another suspect. Stephanie resided in the same neighborhood as his father, Jason Franklin Sr., in 1978. Jay went on to share an even more appalling story from his younger days. According to him, Stephanie was abducted by both of his parents, and at 6 years old, he was not just a witness, but also used as bait to lure the innocent girl. Jay told the police that his father, Jason Franklin Sr., had a history of abusing underage kids, and during that occasion, he was forced to see or even engage in the assault. Jay added that one of those victims was Stephanie. Jay stated that Jason had assaulted Stephanie for 3 times before she passed away. Furthermore, Jay revealed that his mother, Joyce Vinay, was the one who abducted Stephanie Hebert and brought her to her ex-husband's Jason Franklin Sr. Joyce remained loyal to Jason Franklin Sr. even after their separation, and often helped him with his heinous acts. On June 13, 1978, Joyce lured Stephanie into their car and then drove to a Luling property where Jason awaited. After that, Jason got Stephanie into a car and told his ex-wife to follow. They drove the car to the marshy area where Stephanie's body was later found. Jason forced Jay to pose with Stephanie while stripping off her clothes and taking Polaroid photos. Stephanie had initially remained quiet about the mistreatment, but Joyce and Jason started debating over whether this was going too far. In the meantime, Stephanie said that she would inform her father. Jay recalled her uttering the words, "I'm telling Daddy," which might have determined her fate. Jason watched his father bind Stephanie to a tree as they drove away. He even guided the authorities to the exact location where Stephanie's body was found. When confronted by detectives, Joyce accused her son of lying and denied any involvement in the crime. Regardless of Jay Franklin's statement, law enforcement took years to build the case. Considering the lack of concrete evidence, it was necessary to determine whether the information provided is admissible. Ultimately, Jason Franklin Sr., 76, was arrested and charged with taking Stephanie's life in 2018. Regrettably, Joyce Vinay was never charged due to a lack of evidence. Joyce and Donald Hebert lived long enough to see Jason Franklin Sr. taken into custody. They both passed away in 2020, 2 years after his apprehension. Hopefully they died in peace, with the knowledge that the person who had killed their daughter had been brought to justice. The investigation, nonetheless, came to an abrupt end in January 2022, when Jason died in prison from a respiratory illness. In June 2022, J. Franklin, the main witness, was slain by an alleged drunk driver. Therefore, the 44-year-old cold case was officially proclaimed as resolved. That leaves us with the knowledge that even in those seemingly innocent times, there were predators like Jason Franklin Sr. How many other children might have fallen victim to his heinous acts? And what might have happened if Jay hadn't bravely come forward with the truth? Share your thoughts on this harrowing case and the courage it took to finally bring justice for Stephanie Lynn Hebert.